It started with a pain she couldn't put into words. For weeks, maybe even months, Alina had been ignoring the strange symptoms that gnawed at her body and her peace of mind. The dizziness that came without warning, the sharp cramps in her stomach that left her breathless, the nights she lay awake trembling from a heaviness she didn't dare confess to anyone. She worked quietly at her small job in a boutique, plastering a smile on her face while her insides burned with questions she didn't know how to ask. And worst of all, she was too ashamed to talk about it. Every time she thought about visiting a doctor, a voice in her head whispered that she would be judged, that people would laugh at her, or worse, pity her. She carried her secret like a weight chained to her chest. Until one evening, when she fainted in the middle of the shop floor. Her co-workers panicked, rushing her to the nearest hospital. When she opened her eyes, the white light above her stung. She blinked, turned her head, and froze. Standing by her bedside was not the gray-haired doctor she expected, but a young man, no older than she was. His eyes were kind, filled with concern, yet his face looked so strangely familiar. And then it hit her. It was Zion. Her classmate from high school. The same boy who once used to sit behind her in math class, the boy who borrowed pens from her and laughed when he couldn't solve equations. Now, he was wearing a doctor's coat, stethoscope draped around his neck, with the confidence of someone who had worked hard for years to stand in this very position. Alina's cheeks flushed crimson. How could she possibly talk to him about the symptoms she had been hiding, the things too private and humiliating to mention even to her family? She tried to sit up, but he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't push yourself," Zion said softly. "You've been weak for some time, haven't you?" Her lips trembled, but the words refused to come out. She wanted to tell him everything, yet shame clamped her throat shut. She nodded instead, hoping he wouldn't press further. But Zion did. Not with force, not with interrogation, but with patience. He spoke to her not as a doctor above a patient, but as an old friend who wanted to understand. "Alina, do you remember how nervous I used to get before every test? I used to hide it and pretend I was fine. But you always knew. You were the one who told me, hiding it doesn't make it go away." Her eyes welled with tears. Memories of those old days flooded back, and somehow, the tight knot in her chest loosened. For the first time, she whispered about the pain she felt, the exhaustion, the bleeding that came too often, the headaches that made her body feel like it was shutting down. Every word felt like lifting a brick off her heart. Zion listened, never once letting his expression change to judgment or pity. Only understanding. When she finished, she expected him to turn cold, to dismiss her, or worse, to laugh. Instead, he simply nodded. "Alina," he said gently, "I'm glad you told me. What you're going through is serious, but it's not something to be ashamed of. Your body is asking for help, and I promise you we'll find the answers together." The way he said together made her break. She cried openly, years of silence flowing out in streams down her cheeks. Zion gave her space, letting her feel without embarrassment. Then he explained the tests they would need to run, his voice calm and reassuring, never rushing her, never making her feel small. The days that followed were difficult. Blood tests, scans, sleepless nights filled with worry. There were moments when Alina almost backed out, ready to bury her pain again. But each time, Zion was there. He wasn't just her doctor, he was her anchor. He reminded her to breathe when she panicked, reminded her that strength wasn't in silence but in facing fears. When the diagnosis came, it was frightening, a condition that required treatment and lifestyle changes. But it was also treatable, and not the death sentence she had feared in her darkest thoughts. Alina felt both relief and fear, but this time, she didn't carry it alone. She looked at Zion, the boy she once knew, now the man who helped her reclaim her life. And for the first time, she realized that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's speaking your truth even when your voice shakes. Her journey to healing wasn't immediate. There were struggles, days of weakness, moments when she wanted to quit. But now she had hope. And she had a doctor who cared, not because of their past, but because he believed every patient deserved to be heard without shame. At her last follow-up, when she thanked him, Zion smiled and said, "Alina, you did the hardest part yourself. You spoke up. That's what saved you." And those words stayed with her, echoing in her heart. Because she knew there were countless others, just like her, suffering in silence out of shame. And maybe, just maybe, her story could remind them too that they are not alone, and asking for help is never something to be embarrassed about. So, to you watching this, if you've ever felt too afraid, too ashamed, or too weak to speak up about your struggles, remember Alina's story. Don't wait until it's too late. Your voice matters, and your life matters. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of courage, compassion, and second chances. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do, is simply to ask for help. Alina walked out of the hospital one evening after another round of treatment, the cool breeze brushing against her skin. For the first time in years, she felt lighter, as if the secret that had suffocated her was finally gone. Yet deep inside, there was still fear. What if people found out? What if her family questioned her? What if they didn't understand? She returned home to her small apartment, where her mother asked her how work was going. Alina hesitated, tempted to lie again. But then she remembered Zion's words, "You did the hardest part, you spoke up." That night, over dinner, she finally told her mother the truth. Her voice trembled, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop. Her mother was silent for a long moment, and Alina's heart sank. But then, instead of the judgment she feared, her mother took her hand and said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? You don't have to suffer alone, Alina. I'm here." That moment cracked the walls Alina had built around herself for years. She realized how much of her suffering was born not from the illness itself, but from the silence and shame she wrapped it in. Weeks turned into months. The treatment was not easy. There were days when Alina felt weaker than ever, days she questioned if she had the strength to keep fighting. But each time, she remembered the people rooting for her mother, her co-workers who checked in on her, and Zion, who was always just a call away. Slowly, progress came. Her body began to heal, her energy returned, and with it, her confidence. At work, she no longer hid behind fake smiles. She even opened up to a close friend, and to her surprise, that friend confessed she too had once hidden her struggles out of shame. They laughed and cried together, realizing how common it was and how unnecessary their silence had been. One afternoon, Alina found herself back at the hospital, not for treatment, but to thank Zion. She stood outside his office, watching through the glass as he spoke kindly to another patient. She remembered the boy from high school, and then saw the man he had become, the doctor who didn't just heal bodies but touched hearts. When she finally stepped in, she smiled. "You know, Zion, you saved more than just my health. You saved me from myself." He shook his head gently. "No, Alina. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." The two shared a quiet moment, filled with unspoken gratitude. There was no romance, no dramatic twist, just something far more powerful: respect, trust, and the reminder that compassion can change lives. Alina's story didn't end with a perfect cure. It ended with strength. Strength to face her condition, to speak without shame, and to help others do the same. She began volunteering at a local support group, sharing her journey with young women who were afraid to speak about their symptoms. She looked at them and said the very words that once gave her hope: "You are not alone, and asking for help is not weakness, it's courage." And as her story rippled outward, she realized something profound: sometimes the pain we carry becomes the very light that guides others out of darkness. So if you're listening right now, remember this: silence only feeds fear, but speaking up brings freedom. Don't hide your struggles. Don't let shame steal your life. And if Alina's story touched you, give this video a like to spread hope, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who might need this message today. Because you never know, the words you share could save a life.